The Granger station platform smelled like coal dust and disappointment. Marlowe sat on her battered suitcase, trying to make herself smaller, a habit that never actually worked but felt necessary anyway. The November wind cut through her wool coat like it had a personal grudge, and maybe it did. Everything else seemed to. Thought she'd be different. The voice carried from the station house, not quite whispering. Poor man probably didn't know what he was getting. Marlowe didn't turn around. She'd learned young that acknowledging cruelty only invited more of it. Someone should tell the agent. Refund her ticket, maybe. Waste of good money either way. The words landed like they always did. Not shocking anymore, just heavy. Marlowe pulled her coat tighter and watched her breath fog in the lamplight. The station clock read 9:30. She had maybe 6 hours before sunrise, before people started their days and found her still sitting here like abandoned luggage. The Montgomery family had seemed different in their letters. Mrs. Montgomery had written about needing help with the children, about how the frontier was hard on everyone and they didn't care about superficial matters. That phrase had caught Marlowe's attention. Superficial matters. Like maybe her body wouldn't be the first thing they saw. Stupid. So damn stupid to hope. The train had barely stopped before Mrs. Montgomery's face did that thing faces always did. That microscopic flinch, that quick recalculation. Mr. Montgomery hadn't even pretended. He'd looked past Marlowe like she was fog, already scanning the platform for someone else, someone who matched whatever picture they'd built in their heads. There's been a mistake, Mrs. Montgomery had said, her voice sticky sweet with false regret. The position's been filled. We sent a telegram weeks ago. No telegram had arrived. They both knew it. Marlowe had stood there with her suitcase, watching the family board the train without her, watching the conductor avoid her eyes when she asked about passage back east. Next train's Friday, miss. 3 days. 3 days in Granger Station, population maybe 200 on a generous count. 3 days of stares and whispers and that particular kind of violence that came wrapped in pity. The platform was emptying now. A couple with their heads bent together, probably talking about her. An older man who'd glanced over twice, frowning like she was a problem that needed solving. Better that than the usual disgust, she supposed. Marlowe dug into her coat pocket and counted her remaining money by touch. $11 and some change. Enough for a boarding house, maybe, if Granger had one. Enough to eat, barely. Not enough to get anywhere that mattered. Her fingers were going numb. She should move, find shelter, but exhaustion had settled into her bones like sediment. 28 years of this. 28 years of being too much in all the wrong ways, too big, too hungry, too hopeful, despite everything. You planning to freeze to death out here? Marlowe's head jerked up. The older man stood a few feet away, hat in his hands, expression unreadable in the lamplight. I'm fine, she said automatically. You're shaking. I said I'm fine. He studied her for a moment, and Marlowe braced for whatever was coming. Pity usually announced itself with that particular head tilt, that softening around the eyes. Station closes at 10, he said instead. You've got about 20 minutes. I'm aware. Boarding house is 2 blocks north. Mrs. Chen runs it. She's fair. Marlowe nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Kindness was worse than cruelty sometimes. Cruelty you could armor against. The man settled his hat back on his head. Tough night? Tough life, Marlowe said, the words escaping before she could stop them. Something shifted in his expression. Not pity. Something sharper, more knowing. Yeah, he said quietly. I know about those. He walked away before she could respond, boots heavy on the wooden platform. Marlowe watched him disappear into the darkness beyond the station lights, then forced herself to stand. Her legs protested. Everything protested. But sitting here until she froze was just another kind of giving up, and she'd promised herself years ago that she wouldn't do that. The suitcase handle bit into her palm as she lifted it. Inside were 3 dresses, 2 shirtwaists, undergarments that never fit quite right, a hairbrush with half its bristles missing, and a photograph of parents she barely remembered. Everything she owned. Everything she was. The station door groaned as she pulled it open. Warmth hit her face, the potbelly stove in the corner still radiating heat. The ticket agent glanced up from his paperwork, and his expression did that thing again. That flash of something between surprise and disappointment. Help you? Need directions to the boarding house. He pointed with his pen, not quite meeting her eyes. North on Main Street. Can't miss it. Thank you. She was halfway out the door when he spoke again. For what it's worth, the Montgomerys are trash people. Everyone knows it. Marlowe froze. The agent was already back to his paperwork, as if he hadn't just offered the closest thing to comfort she'd received all night. Thank you, she said again, meaning it this time. Main Street was dark and mostly empty. A few lit windows marked saloons and what looked like a general store. Marlowe kept her eyes forward, suitcase banging against her leg with each step. The cold was brutal now, turning her breath into clouds, making her lungs ache. The boarding house was marked by a painted sign and warm light spilling from downstairs windows. Marlowe climbed the porch steps, each one creaking under her weight. Another reminder, as if she needed one. She knocked, waited, knocked again. The woman who answered was small and sharp-eyed, her dark hair streaked with silver. She looked Marlowe up and down without pretense, a frank assessment that was somehow less insulting than false courtesy. Mrs. Chen? That's right. I need a room, 3 nights, maybe 4. Mrs. Chen's gaze flicked to the suitcase, back to Marlowe's face. $1 a night, includes breakfast. Supper's extra if I've got enough. That's fine. You running from something? The question caught Marlowe off guard. No. Running to something that didn't work out. Mrs. Chen nodded like that made perfect sense. Story of the frontier. Come on then. The boarding house smelled like wood smoke and cooking oil. Mrs. Chen led Marlowe up narrow stairs to a room barely big enough for the bed and washstand crammed inside. But it was clean, and the window had real glass, and the quilt looked warm. Breakfast is at 7, Mrs. Chen said. You sleep past that, you go hungry. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Chen paused in the doorway. The people who left you at the station, they're fools. She was gone before Marlowe could respond. Marlowe set her suitcase down and sat on the bed. The mattress sagged but held. She should undress, wash up, sleep. Instead, she stared at the wall and felt the weight of every mile that had led her here. She'd grown up in Philadelphia, an orphan shuffled between institutions that treated children like inventory. Fat girls were particularly unwanted. Too expensive to feed, the matron said. Bad influences on the other children. Marlowe had learned to stay quiet, stay useful, stay invisible when possible. At 16, she'd found work in a factory. At 20, the factory closed. She'd tried domestic service, but families wanted their help to be decorative or at least inoffensive to look at. She'd tried shop work, restaurant work, laundry work. Every job ended the same way eventually. Some comment, some complaint, some excuse to let her go. The letters to frontier families had been a last resort. Out west, she'd thought, maybe things were different. Maybe survival mattered more than appearance. Maybe she could find somewhere she fit. The Montgomery debacle should have taught her better. Marlowe finally undressed, shivering in the cold room. She washed her face with water from the pitcher, changed into her nightgown, and crawled under the quilt. The wind rattled the window in its frame. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. She closed her eyes and tried not to think about Friday's train. Tried not to think about going back to Philadelphia with even less than she'd left with. Tried not to think about the fact that she was 28 years old and had nowhere in the world that wanted her. Sleep came eventually, thin and unsatisfying. Quite some. Morning announced itself with pale light and the smell of coffee. Marlowe dressed quickly, her fingers clumsy with cold. The mirror above the washstand was small and spotted, but it showed enough. Tired eyes, brown hair that wouldn't behave, a body that seemed designed to disappoint. She looked away. Downstairs, Mrs. Chen presided over a dining room with 2 long tables. 3 other boarders were already eating. 2 men who looked like ranch hands and a woman with a baby on her hip. They glanced at Marlowe, then away. Not hostile, just disinterested. Sit, Mrs. Chen said, pointing to an empty spot. Coffee's fresh, eggs and biscuits coming. The food was simple but good. Marlowe ate slowly, trying to make it last, trying to ignore the hollow knowledge that she had 2 more days of this before facing whatever came next. You looking for work? Marlowe looked up. One of the ranch hands was watching her, his expression curious rather than cruel. Not sure I'm staying that long. Most people who come through Granger don't, he said. Not much here unless you're into cattle or isolation. What are you into? He grinned. Neither, But it pays. The other ranch hand snorted. Pays poorly. Pays enough. Mrs. Chen set a plate of eggs in front of Marlowe. Don't let these two fool you. Boone Ranch pays better than most. They're just complainers. Boone Ranch? Marlowe asked. About 10 miles north. Cattle operation. The boss is… Mrs. Chen paused, searching for words. Complicated. Complicated how? Lost his wife 2 years back. Been raising twin girls on his own ever since. Good man, mostly, but carrying more weight than one person should. The first ranch hand nodded. He's been looking for help with the girls. Can't find anyone willing to live that far out. Something stirred in Marlowe's chest. Dangerous something. Hope, maybe, or desperation wearing hope's clothing. What kind of help? Someone to mind them, teach them, keep them from burning down the house when he's working. The ranch hand shrugged. Problem is, the ranch is barely staying afloat. Most women take one look at the situation and head back to civilization. Most women have better options, the other hand said. Marlowe pushed her eggs around her plate. A ranch 10 miles from nowhere. Twin girls who needed minding. A complicated man with too much weight on his shoulders. It was stupid to consider. Stupid to let that ember of hope start glowing. Where would I find him? She asked. If I wanted to ask about it. Mrs. Chen studied her with those sharp eyes. You sure you want to? It's hard living out there. Ma'am, I've been living hard my whole life. At least this would be hard with a purpose. Mrs. Chen's expression softened slightly. He comes to town for supplies every few days. Due in tomorrow, probably. You want me to mention it? I can mention it myself if you'll tell me where to find him. General store. Early afternoon, usually. Marlowe nodded. The ranch hands had gone back to their food, the conversation apparently over. But Marlowe's mind was racing now, building possibilities she knew better than to trust. A job. Real work. Children who needed someone, not a family looking for decoration. It probably wouldn't work out. Nothing ever did. But she had 2 days before the train came, and sitting in this boarding house waiting wasn't going to change anything. After breakfast, Marlowe bundled into her coat and stepped outside. Granger looked less hostile in daylight. Still small, still isolated, but the mountains in the distance were beautiful in a harsh kind of way. Snow capped the peaks, brilliant white against blue sky. She walked Main Street slowly, getting her bearings. The general store, a blacksmith, 2 saloons, a church, a building that might have been a school. At the end of the street, a livery stable where horses stamped and snorted in the cold. People watched her pass with varying degrees of curiosity. A few nodded. Most didn't. Marlowe kept her chin up and her expression neutral, a skill perfected over years of being stared at. The general store was warm and crowded with goods. Marlowe browsed without buying, her limited funds too precious to waste. The shopkeeper, a balding man with kind eyes, asked if she needed help finding anything. Just looking, thank you. You're new in town. It wasn't a question. Passing through, Marlowe said. Most folks are. He went back to his inventory without pressing further. Marlowe spent an hour walking the town's perimeter, learning its shape. Not much to learn. Granger was a supply point for surrounding ranches, a place to rest between more important places. No one came here to stay. By noon, she was back at the boarding house. Mrs. Chen was in the kitchen, and the smell of something savory filled the air. You plan to wear out the town by walking it to death? Just getting familiar. Familiar with what? We've got one street? Marlowe smiled despite herself. Then I'm thoroughly familiar. Mrs. Chen wiped her hands on her apron. You're serious about the ranch job. I don't have a lot of options. That's not the same as wanting it, Marlowe considered. No, but maybe wanting things is a luxury I can't afford right now. Mrs. Chen made a soft sound that might have been approval or sympathy. Silas Boon isn't an easy man. He's fair, from what I hear, but he doesn't suffer fools and he doesn't have patience for drama. I'm not dramatic. No, you're tired. Mrs. Chen met Marlowe's eyes. I recognize it because I used to see it in my mirror. That bone-deep tired that comes from fighting too long. Marlowe's throat tightened. How did you stop fighting? Found something worth fighting for instead of just fighting to survive. Mrs. Chen turned back to her cooking. Maybe you will too. The afternoon stretched long and empty. Marlowe tried to read a water-damaged novel she'd brought from Philadelphia, but the words wouldn't stick. Her mind kept circling back to tomorrow, to the possibility sitting just out of reach. She should lower her expectations, protect herself. The Montgomery disaster was barely 24 hours old, but when had protecting herself ever actually protected her from anything? That night, Marlowe lay awake listening to the wind and trying to imagine what 10 miles north looked like. Cattle, the ranch hand had said. Mountains, probably. Cold that made Granger seem warm. Twin girls who needed someone. A complicated man carrying too much weight. It was a foolish thing to hope for. But hope had always been her particular brand of foolishness, stubborn as a weed and just as impossible to kill. Morning came cold and clear. Marlowe dressed carefully, choosing her least worn dress, pinning her hair with extra attention. Not trying to be pretty, that ship had sailed and sunk long ago, but trying to look capable, competent, like someone you could trust with children. Mrs. Chen raised an eyebrow at breakfast, but said nothing. The morning dragged. Marlowe cleaned her room twice, reorganized her suitcase, paced the boarding house until Mrs. Chen told her to sit down before she wore holes in the floor. "He'll be here when he's here," Mrs. Chen said. "Making yourself nervous won't speed it up." "I'm not nervous." "You're terrified. There's a difference." Marlowe opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. "Yes, ma'am." At 1 o'clock, Mrs. Chen nodded toward the window. "That'll be him." Marlowe looked out to see a wagon pulling up in front of the general store. The man driving was broad-shouldered and weather-worn, his face hidden under a wide-brimmed hat. 2 small figures sat beside him, bundled in coats too big for their frames. "Go on then," Mrs. Chen said, "before you lose your nerve." Marlowe grabbed her coat and stepped outside before she could think better of it. The cold hit her face like a slap. She walked toward the general store, her heart hammering against her ribs. The man was helping the children down from the wagon, his movements careful and patient. Up close, Marlowe could see he was younger than she'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair and the kind of tan that came from working outside in all weather. The girls were identical, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with their father's dark hair and enormous brown eyes. "Stay close," the man was saying. "Don't wander off." "Yes, Papa," they chorused. Marlowe stood there, suddenly frozen. This was stupid. She was about to make a fool of herself again. The man looked up and saw her. His expression was neutral, assessing without being unkind. "Help you with something?" Marlowe's voice caught. She forced it out. "I heard you might be looking for help. With your daughters." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Who told you that?" "Mrs. Chen and some ranch hands at breakfast." "People talk too much in this town." One of the girls tugged on his sleeve. "Papa, who's the lady?" "No one," he started to say. "Someone who might be able to help your father," Marlowe interrupted, looking at the girl instead of the man. "If he's willing to listen for 5 minutes." The girl studied Marlowe with unnerving intensity. "You're big." "Emma," the man said sharply. "It's all right," Marlowe said, even though it wasn't. "I am big, but that doesn't affect my ability to mind children or teach them or keep them safe." The other girl was staring now too. "Are you nice?" The question was so direct, so childishly honest, that Marlowe felt something crack in her chest. "I try to be," she said, "but I'm not perfect. Nobody is." The man, Silas Boon, presumably, was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "You have experience with children?" "Some. Mostly in institutions back east. I'm not formally trained, but I'm patient and I don't give up easy." "Why do you want this job?" The honest answer would have been because I'm desperate and running out of options. But Marlowe met his eyes and said, "Because your daughters deserve someone who will actually show up for them. And I'm good at showing up, even when it's hard." Something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or respect. "The ranch is isolated," he said. 10 miles from town. Winters are brutal. You'd be living in close quarters with 3 strangers. Most women can't handle it. Most women haven't spent their lives being told they can't handle things and then handling them anyway. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Fair point." One of the girls, Emma, Marlowe thought, stepped closer. "Can you read?" "Yes." "Can you cook?" "Well enough." "Can you ride horses?" Marlowe hesitated. "No, but I can learn." Papa says lying is bad. I'm not lying. I've never been on a horse in my life, but that doesn't mean I can't learn how. The other girl, quieter than her sister, spoke up. Mama used to read to us. Before she died. The words fell into silence. Silas's jaw tightened. Emma's eyes went shiny. I'm sorry, Marlowe said quietly. That must be very hard. Everyone's sorry, Emma said, her voice sharp with childish anger. But sorry doesn't bring her back. No, Marlowe agreed. It doesn't. Nothing can do that. Emma blinked, clearly not expecting agreement. You're strange. I've been called worse. Silas cleared his throat. Girls, go inside the store. Tell Mr. Patterson I'll be in shortly. They obeyed reluctantly, casting backward glances at Marlowe. When they were gone, Silas turned his full attention on her, and Marlowe felt the weight of his scrutiny. You understand what you're asking for, he said. It wasn't a question. I think so. No, you don't. His voice was flat, factual. The ranch is failing. I'm barely keeping it running. There's no money for fancy things, no social calls or parties or whatever women expect. It's work from sunup to sundown, dealing with cattle and weather and creditors who'd like nothing better than to see me lose everything. I'm not afraid of work. You should be afraid of isolation, of being stuck in the middle of nowhere with no way out when winter hits. Mr. Boon, Marlowe said, I've been isolated my entire life. At least on your ranch, I'd have a purpose. He studied her for a long moment. Why were you at the station 2 nights ago? Mrs. Chen mentioned you'd just arrived. Marlowe's stomach dropped. Of course Mrs. Chen had told him. Small towns didn't keep secrets. I came for a job that didn't work out. The family decided I wasn't what they wanted. Why? She could lie. Make up something about a misunderstanding or a scheduling conflict. But something in his directness demanded honesty. They took one look at me and decided I wasn't suitable. Because of your size. Hearing it stated so plainly should have hurt. Instead, it was almost a relief. Yes. Silas nodded slowly. I need someone strong. Not strong like can lift heavy things strong, though that helps. Strong like won't break when things get hard strong. You think you're that? Marlowe thought about every job she'd lost, every door slammed in her face, every cruel word and casual dismissal. Thought about still being here, still standing, still trying. Yes, she said, I'm that. The girls are difficult. They miss their mother. They act out. They don't trust easily anymore. I don't trust easily either. Maybe that'll help us understand each other. Another almost smile. Maybe. He was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking. Marlowe waited, hardly breathing. Room and board, he finally said, plus $20 a month. I can't pay more right now. If the ranch turns around, we'll renegotiate. It took Marlowe a second to understand. You're hiring me? On a trial basis, 1 month. If it doesn't work out, I'll pay your train fare back to wherever you came from. That's more than fair. I'm not done. You'll have your own room, but it's small. You'll eat with us, work with us. The girls come first, always. Their safety, their needs. Everything else is secondary. Understood? Yes, sir. And Marlowe? He used her first name for the first time, his voice dropping lower. If you hurt those girls, if you disappoint them or let them down, I'll put you on the next train myself. They've been through enough. The threat should have been frightening. Instead, it felt like proof that he actually cared, which was more than most fathers managed. I won't hurt them, Marlowe said. I know what it feels like to be hurt. I wouldn't do that to anyone, especially not children. Silas held her gaze for another long moment, then nodded. We leave in an hour. Get your things. He walked toward the general store, leaving Marlowe standing in the street with her heart racing and her hands shaking. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. A job. A real job. A place to go that wasn't backward. Marlowe walked back to the boarding house in a daze. Mrs. Chen took one look at her face and smiled. I take it he said yes. 1 month trial? That's how Silas operates. Tests everything before committing, but if you prove yourself, he's loyal to the bone. And if I don't prove myself? Mrs. Chen shrugged. Then you tried. That's more than most people can say. Marlowe packed her suitcase with trembling hands. Everything she owned, fitting into one small bag. It seemed appropriate somehow. Starting over with almost nothing again. But this time felt different. This time she'd earned the chance herself. When she came back downstairs, Mrs. Chen was waiting with a package wrapped in cloth. "Bread and cheese," she said. "For the journey, don't argue." "Thank you," Marlowe said, her throat tight. "For everything. You did the hard part yourself. I just pointed you in the right direction." Mrs. Chen paused. "Be patient with those girls. They're hurting in ways they don't have words for yet." "I will. And be patient with yourself, too. You're allowed to struggle." Marlowe nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The wagon was waiting outside the general store. Silas was loading supplies while the girls sat in the back, whispering to each other. They stopped when they saw Marlowe approach. "You're really coming?" the quieter one asked. "If that's all right with you." The girl considered. "What's your name?" "Marlowe Bennett." "I'm Sarah, that's Emma." "It's nice to meet you properly, Sarah." Emma was less welcoming. "Papa says you're staying for a month." "That's right." "What happens after a month?" Honest answer? I don't know. Safe answer? We'll see. Marlowe chose honesty. "That depends on whether we all get along, whether I do a good job taking care of you." "And if you don't?" "Then I leave, and your father finds someone else." Emma's expression was hard to read. "Everyone leaves eventually." Before Marlowe could respond, Silas returned. "All set. Marlowe, you can sit up front or in back with the girls." "I'll sit in back if that's all right." The wagon bed was full of supplies, but there was room among the sacks and crates. Marlowe settled herself, trying to ignore the way the wagon creaked under her weight. Emma and Sarah watched her without speaking. Silas climbed into the driver's seat and clicked to the horses. The wagon lurched forward. Granger fell away behind them, swallowed by distance and dust. The landscape opened up into rolling grassland dotted with sagebrush. In the distance, mountains rose like broken teeth against the sky. "It's beautiful," Marlowe said, more to herself than anyone. "It's deadly," Emma corrected. "Papa says beauty out here is just danger wearing pretty clothes." Sarah elbowed her sister. "Papa also says it's worth the danger. When we're not about to lose everything." "Emma," Silas called from the front. "Enough." Emma crossed her arms but fell silent. Sarah gave Marlowe an apologetic look. The wagon rolled on, wheels grinding over rough ground. The cold was intense, but Marlowe barely felt it. She was too focused on the girls, on learning their faces, their mannerisms. Emma, fierce and guarded. Sarah, quieter, but no less sharp. Both of them watching Marlowe like she was a problem to solve. "How old are you?" Sarah asked eventually. 28. "That's old," Marlowe smiled. "Feels that way sometimes. Our mama was 29 when she died." The words were matter of fact, but the pain underneath was enormous. Marlowe's chest ached. "What was she like?" Sarah's face brightened. "Pretty. She had yellow hair and she laughed a lot." "She made good biscuits," Emma added grudgingly, "and she never yelled, even when we were bad." "She sounds wonderful." "She was." Emma's voice went sharp again. "Nobody can replace her." "I wouldn't try," Marlowe said. "Some people are irreplaceable, but that doesn't mean new people can't be valuable too." Emma didn't respond, but something in her posture softened slightly. The sun was lowering when the ranch finally came into view. It was smaller than Marlowe had imagined, rougher. A main house that looked like it was fighting to stay upright. A barn that had seen better days, a scattering of outbuildings in various states of disrepair. But smoke rose from the chimney and lamplight glowed in the windows. Signs of life, signs of trying. "It's not much," Silas said, pulling the wagon to a stop. "But it's ours." He said it with pride that felt earned. This wasn't inherited wealth or easy success. This was something built by hand, maintained through sheer stubbornness. Marlowe climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from the journey. The girls jumped down with practiced ease, already running toward the house. "Careful!" Silas called after them. He began unloading supplies, and Marlowe moved to help without being asked. Together they carried sacks and crates into a storage shed. "The house is this way," Silas said when they finished. "I'll show you your room, then we'll have supper. Nothing fancy." I wasn't expecting fancy. The house was warmer than it looked from outside. The main room held a fireplace, a worn sofa, a table with mismatched chairs. Everything was clean but tired, like it had been used hard for too long. Silas led her down a narrow hallway to a small room at the back. It held a bed, a washstand, and a trunk. A window looked out over dark grassland. "It's not much," Silas said again. "It's perfect." He looked at her like he was trying to decide if she meant it. "Girls sleep across the hall. I'm at the front of the house. Outhouse is out back. Well pump is in the kitchen. We heat water on the stove for washing." "Understood." "Questions?" 1,000. But Marlowe shook her head. "Not yet." Silas nodded and left her alone. Marlowe set her suitcase on the bed and looked around her new room. Small, cold, sparse. But hers, at least for now. She unpacked slowly, putting her few belongings in the trunk. The photograph of her parents went on the washstand. She stood looking at it for a moment, trying to remember their faces beyond the faded image. They would have wanted better for her. Everyone did. But maybe this was enough. Maybe trying was enough. Voices drifted from the main room. The girls arguing about something, Silas's low rumble cutting through. Normal sounds, family sounds. Marlowe took a breath and went to join them. Sarah was setting the table while Emma stoked the fire. Silas stood at the stove, stirring something in a pot. "Can I help?" Marlowe asked. "You can slice that bread." Silas pointed with his spoon. "Knife's in the drawer." The bread was the loaf Mrs. Chen had given her. Marlowe sliced it carefully, aware of the girls watching her every move. Supper was simple: stew and bread, water to drink. They ate in relative silence, the kind that came from exhaustion rather than discomfort. Afterwards, Sarah asked, "Can you really read?" "Yes." "Will you read to us?" "Before bed." Marlowe glanced at Silas, who nodded permission. "I'd like that." The girls led her to their room, which was barely bigger than Marlowe's, but held 2 small beds and a battered bookshelf. Sarah selected a book with reverent care. This was Mama's favorite. It was a collection of fairy tales, the spine cracked from repeated reading. Marlowe settled into the chair between the beds and opened to the marked page. "Where were you?" "The Princess and the Tower." Marlowe began to read. Her voice was rusty at first, but it smoothed out as she went. The girls listened intently, Sarah with her eyes closed, Emma watching Marlowe's face like she was searching for something. When the chapter ended, Emma spoke up. "You read different than Mama did." "I'm sorry." "I didn't say it was bad, just different." Sarah was already half asleep. Emma climbed into her bed but kept her eyes on Marlowe. "Are you going to leave?" "Not if I can help it." "Everyone says that." "I know, but I mean it." Emma studied her for a long moment. "We'll see." It wasn't trust, but it wasn't total rejection either. It was a door left slightly open. Marlowe would take it. She left them to sleep and found Silas in the main room, reviewing papers by lamplight. He looked up when she entered. "They're settled," Marlowe said. "Good, they like you." "Emma doesn't. Emma doesn't like anyone right now. She's angry at the whole world for taking her mother." Marlowe understood that anger. She'd carried her own version for years. "I'll be patient with her." Silas set down his pen. "Tomorrow starts early, 5 o'clock. The girls will need breakfast before I head out to check the cattle. Can you handle that?" "Yes." "After that, you can work with them on their letters. They're behind where they should be." His expression tightened. "I've been trying, but I'm not much of a teacher." "I'll do my best." That's all anyone can do. He went back to his papers, clearly exhausted. Marlowe said goodnight and retreated to her room. The bed was hard, but better than some she'd slept in. The quilt smelled like cedar, and something else, something she couldn't name. She lay in the darkness, listening to the wind outside and the house settling around her. This was real. She was here. She'd been given a chance. Don't waste it, she told herself. Don't mess this up. But even as the thought formed, she felt the familiar weight of doubt pressing down. How long before Silas saw what everyone else saw? How long before this fell apart like everything else? Marlowe closed her eyes and forced the thoughts away. Tomorrow would come whether she worried or not. Better to sleep and face it rested. The wind howled, the house creaked, and somewhere in the darkness, Marlowe Bennett, the woman who'd been left behind at a train station, who'd been rejected and dismissed and underestimated her entire life, fell asleep in a place that might just possibly become home. If she could prove she belonged there, if she could prove she was strong enough, if she could finally, after 28 years of trying, be enough, The first thing Marlowe learned about ranch life was that 5 o'clock came faster than any reasonable hour should. The second thing was that cold out here wasn't just cold, it was a living thing that crept through walls and under blankets and settled into your bones like it planned to stay. She dressed in the dark, fumbling with buttons, her breath fogging in the lamplight. Outside her window, the world was still black except for a thin gray line on the eastern horizon. The kitchen was freezing. Marlowe got the stove going, feeding it kindling until flames caught and held. The warmth was minimal, but better than nothing. She found coffee grounds in a tin, filled the pot with water from the pump, and set it to boil. Breakfast was supposed to be her responsibility now. She opened cupboards, taking inventory. Flour, salt, lard, a jar of preserves that looked homemade. Eggs in a basket, probably from chickens she hadn't seen yet. Bacon wrapped in cloth. Marlowe had cooked in boarding houses and institutions, but always under supervision, always following someone else's recipes. This was different. This was figure it out or everyone goes hungry. She decided on biscuits and bacon, eggs if she didn't burn them. Simple. Hard to ruin completely. The biscuit dough came together unevenly, too dry in some spots, too wet in others. She kneaded it anyway, shaped it into rough rounds, and slid them into the oven. The bacon went into a skillet, sizzling and spitting grease. "You're up early." Marlowe jumped, nearly dropping the spatula. Silas stood in the doorway, already dressed for work, his hair damp like he'd splashed water on his face. "You said 5 o'clock. I meant around 5. Not exactly 5. But he didn't sound annoyed, just surprised. "Coffee ready?" "Should be." He poured himself a cup and leaned against the counter, watching her work. It should have made her nervous, but his presence was more tired than judgmental. "Girls won't be up for another hour," he said. "They're not morning people." "Should I wait to cook for them?" "No. They'll eat when they're ready. I need to head out soon to check the north pasture. Lost 3 head last week." "Lost how?" His jaw tightened. "Rustlers, most likely, or they wandered through a break in the fence. Either way, can't afford to lose more." The bacon was starting to char. Marlowe flipped it quickly, annoyed at herself for getting distracted. "You know how to handle a rifle?" Silas asked. The question threw her. "No, I'll teach you. Out here, you need to know how to protect yourself and the girls if something happens." "What kind of something?" "Coyotes. Sometimes wolves. Occasionally people who think an isolated ranch is easy pickings." He took a long drink of coffee. "World's not as civilized as folks back east like to pretend." Marlowe thought about Philadelphia, about the different kinds of danger that came with crowds and anonymity. "I'm starting to understand that." The biscuits were done, golden on top if slightly lopsided. She pulled them out and plated the bacon. The eggs could wait until the girls woke up. Silas sat at the table and ate without ceremony, 3 biscuits, half the bacon, 2 cups of coffee. When he finished, he looked at her directly. "They're good. The biscuits." It was stated as fact, not flattery. Somehow that made it mean more. "Thank you. You'll do fine here. Just don't let the girls run over you. They'll test boundaries." "Most children do." "These 2 are experts at it." He stood, setting his cup in the wash basin. "I'll be back before dark. There's firewood out back if you need it. Keep the doors locked when I'm gone." "Will do." He paused at the door, hat in hand. "Marlowe? Thank you for showing up." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a solid thunk. Marlowe cleaned up the kitchen, moving quietly so she wouldn't wake the girls. Outside, she heard Silas calling to someone, then the sound of horses and men's voices. The ranch hands, probably, heading out for the day's work. She made herself a plate and ate standing by the window, watching dawn break over the grassland. The light came slowly, turning the world from black to gray to gold. It was beautiful in a stark way. All that empty space stretching to the mountains. Lonely, too. But Marlowe had been lonely in crowded cities. At least here, the loneliness came with purpose. Footsteps shuffled in the hallway. Sarah appeared first, rubbing her eyes, her nightgown dragging on the floor. "Morning," Marlowe said. Sarah blinked at her like she'd forgotten Marlowe existed. "You're still here." "Where else would I be?" "Everyone leaves." It was the second time someone in this family had said that. Marlowe crouched down to Sarah's level. "I'm not everyone, and I don't break promises." "You didn't promise anything." "Then I'm promising now. I'll be here as long as you and your father will have me. Sarah studied her with those enormous brown eyes, then nodded slowly. I'm hungry. Eggs? Yes, please. Emma emerged a few minutes later, grumpier and more disheveled. She glared at Marlowe like her presence was a personal insult. Papa's already gone? Emma asked. About 20 minutes ago. He didn't say goodbye. He probably didn't want to wake you. He should have woken me. Marlowe scrambled eggs while the girls sat at the table in hostile silence. Well, Emma's silence was hostile. Sarah just looked sleepy. Breakfast was a quiet affair. The girls ate mechanically, not talking, not looking at each other or Marlowe. When they finished, Emma pushed her plate away. What are we supposed to do now? Your father said you're behind on your letters. Emma's expression darkened. I know my letters. Then you can help me teach Sarah. Sarah knows hers too. Do you know how to write them? Emma hesitated. Some. Then we'll practice. After we clean up. Mama never made us clean up. I'm not your mama. Marlowe said it gently but firmly. And in this house, everyone helps. Emma looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Marlowe's tone must have convinced her it wouldn't work. She stood and carried her plate to the wash basin with exaggerated reluctance. Sarah followed without complaint. They worked together in tense silence, washing and drying dishes. Marlowe could feel Emma's resentment like heat from the stove, but the girl didn't actually refuse to help. Small victory. When the kitchen was clean, Marlowe found paper and a pencil in a drawer. The table became their classroom, such as it was. Let's start with your names, Marlowe said. Sarah, can you write yours? Sarah took the pencil with careful fingers and slowly formed the letters. S-A-R-A-H. The R was backward, and the H looked more like two eyes, but it was recognizable. Good. Now try it again, but make the R face the other direction. Sarah tried. The second attempt was better. Emma watched with her arms crossed. That's baby stuff. Then show me something that isn't. Emma grabbed the pencil and wrote her name in quick, angry strokes. E-M-M-A. The letters were sharp and uneven, but readable. Excellent. Now write your father's name. Emma's hand hesitated. Why? Because knowing how to write names is important. What if you need to leave him a note? That logic seemed to satisfy her. She wrote S-I-L-A-S in the same aggressive script. For the next hour, they practiced letters and simple words. Sarah was patient and willing to try. Emma was impatient and sloppy, rushing through everything like she resented the task itself. But she didn't quit. That counted for something. By mid-morning, Marlowe's head was aching and the girls were restless. She sent them outside to play, watching from the window to make sure they didn't wander too far. The ranch stretched out in all directions, brown grass and scrub brush, and nothing else. A few cattle dotted the landscape, dark shapes against the horizon. In the distance, she could see men on horseback, too far away to identify. Marlowe used the quiet to explore the house more thoroughly. The main room held evidence of a woman's touch buried under years of neglect. Faded curtains that had once been cheerful, a rug worn thin by foot traffic, a shelf with books that looked well read. One book was a journal, the handwriting inside small and neat. Marlowe opened it, then closed it quickly when she realized what it was. A dead woman's private thoughts. Not hers to read. She moved on to the rest of the house. Silas's room was sparse and utilitarian. A bed, a trunk, a washstand. No photographs, no personal items except a shaving kit and some work clothes. The girls' room was messier but more alive. Toys scattered on the floor, drawings pinned to the wall, a doll with one arm missing sitting on Sarah's pillow. Marlowe returned to the main room and sat by the fire. The silence was profound, broken only by wind and the occasional creak of the house settling. She could hear the girls outside, their voices faint but present. This was her life now, this house, these children, this isolated stretch of frontier. It should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like the first deep breath she'd taken in years. The girls came back inside around noon, red-cheeked and breathless. "We're hungry," Emma announced. Marlowe made sandwiches from leftover bacon and the preserves. They ate quickly, then Sarah asked if they could practice their letters more. "Can we write a story instead?" Marlowe suggested. "What kind of story?" "Any kind you want." You tell me what happens, and I'll help you write it down. Sarah's face lit up. Even Emma looked interested despite herself. They spent the afternoon creating a story about two sisters who found a magic horse. Sarah dictated, Emma corrected and added details, and Marlowe wrote it all down in simple sentences they could practice copying later. The horse could fly, Sarah said. That's stupid, Emma countered. Horses can't fly. It's magic. Magic isn't real. It is in stories. Emma scowled but didn't argue further. Fine. The magic horse could fly, but only at night. They built the story piece by piece, the girls gradually forgetting to be guarded around Marlowe. By the time Silas returned dusty and exhausted, they had 3 pages of careful handwriting. Papa! Sarah ran to him. We wrote a story! Silas picked her up despite his obvious fatigue. Did you now? About sisters and a magic horse. Sounds impressive. He looked at Marlowe over Sarah's head. Everything go all right? Fine, they worked hard. Emma showed him the pages, pointing out her contributions. Silas read through them carefully, his expression softening. This is good work, both of you. The praise made Sarah beam. Emma tried to hide her pleasure, but failed. Dinner was beans and cornbread, simple and filling. Afterward, Marlowe read to the girls while Silas went through his papers again, his face tight with worry. When the girls were in bed, Marlowe found him still at the table, staring at numbers that clearly didn't add up the way he wanted. Can I get you anything? She asked. Peace of mind. He said it like a joke, but his eyes were serious. How was your first full day? Tiring. Good. The girls didn't give you too much trouble? Emma's testing me. Sarah's more trusting. But they're both smart and capable when they want to be. Silas nodded. Their mother was smart too. They get it from her. It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife directly. Marlowe waited, sensing there was more. Elizabeth died in childbirth, he said quietly. 3rd baby. Something went wrong, and the doctor couldn't stop the bleeding. We lost them both. The grief in his voice was old but not healed. Marlowe's chest tightened. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. He echoed Emma's words. But sorry doesn't change anything. No, it doesn't. He looked up at her. You're not going to tell me it was part of some greater plan or that she's in a better place. Would it help if I did? No. Then I won't say it. Something in his expression shifted. Respect, maybe, or just relief at not having to hear platitudes. The ranch is in trouble, he said abruptly. Might as well be honest about it. We're 3 months behind on loan payments. Lost cattle to theft and weather. The bank's getting impatient. What happens if you can't pay? They take the ranch. Everything my father built, everything I've tried to maintain, gone. There must be something you can do. I'm doing it. Working every daylight hour, cutting costs. But it's not enough. He rubbed his face tiredly. And now I've hired you, which is another expense I can't afford. You need help with the girls. I do. But need and afford are different things. Marlowe thought for a moment. What if I worked for less, $10 a month instead of $20? No. Why not? Because you're worth 20. More probably, but that's what I offered, and I'm not cheating you just because I'm desperate. His stubbornness was frustrating and admirable in equal measure. Then let me help in other ways. I can cook for the ranch hands, do their mending, whatever saves you money or time. Silas studied her. You don't have to do that. I want to. This is my home now too, for as long as you'll let me stay. I'd like it to survive. He was quiet for a long moment. All right, but you're still getting paid fairly. I won't negotiate on that. Deal. They shook hands across the table, his grip firm and calloused. When he let go, Marlowe felt the absence of that contact more than she expected. Get some rest, Silas said. Tomorrow, we start early again. Marlowe retreated to her room, exhausted but satisfied. 1 day down. 29 more until the trial period ended. She could do this. She was doing this. The days fell into a rhythm. Wake before dawn, make breakfast, teach the girls, handle household tasks, make dinner, read before bed. It was repetitive and exhausting, and Marlowe had never felt more useful in her life. The girls slowly warmed to her. Sarah first, predictably. She started seeking Marlowe out for help with things, asking questions, wanting to be near her. Emma held out longer, maintaining her defensive anger like armor. But even Emma started to crack. It happened during the second week when one of the ranch hands, a man named Garrett, who smiled too much and laughed too loud, made a comment at dinner. "Boss sure knows how to pick 'em," he said, grinning at Marlowe. "Got yourself a sturdy one this time." The other hand shifted uncomfortably. Silas's expression went cold. "Garrett, shut your mouth. Just saying she looks like she can handle hard work. No offense meant. You're done eating. Get out." Garrett's grin faltered. "Boss, I was just out. Now." Garrett left, still protesting. The remaining hands ate in silence, avoiding everyone's eyes. Emma had watched the whole exchange, and later, when Marlowe was washing dishes, the girl appeared at her elbow. "Garrett's mean," Emma said quietly. "Some people are." "Does it hurt your feelings when people say things like that?" Marlowe considered lying, but Emma deserved honesty. "Yes, every time." "Then why don't you yell at them?" "Because yelling won't change how they think, and it won't change who I am." Emma frowned. "That's stupid." "Maybe, but it's how I survive." "Papa yelled at him." "Your papa's a good man." Emma was quiet for a moment. "He likes you, I can tell." "I like him too, and you and Sarah." "Even though I've been mean to you?" "You haven't been mean. You've been protecting yourself. There's a difference." Emma looked up at her, those brown eyes too old for a 7-year-old. "Mama used to say that, about protecting yourself." She was right. Something shifted in Emma's face. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. "Can you teach me how to make biscuits like you do?" Emma asked. "Of course." They baked together the next morning, Emma's small hands learning to work the dough. She was impatient and messy, but she tried hard and didn't give up when things didn't work the first time. The biscuits came out lopsided and oversalted, but Silas ate 3 of them and declared them delicious. Emma glowed under the praise. Winter began to settle in properly, bringing snow that turned the landscape white and made every task twice as hard. Marlowe learned to split firewood, to recognize when the stove needed feeding, to layer clothes until she looked twice her size. The cold was brutal, but the house stayed warm enough. The girls taught her card games and told her stories about their mother that were equal parts memory and mythology. Silas spoke less but smiled more, small expressions that transformed his face. The ranch hands accepted her gradually. Some remained distant, but others started leaving torn shirts for her to mend or asking if she needed anything from town when they went for supplies. Garrett never came back. Marlowe didn't ask what happened to him. 3 weeks into her trial period, a man arrived at the ranch in a black coat and expensive boots. Silas's face went hard when he saw him. "Stay inside with the girls," he told Marlowe. She watched from the window as Silas and the man talked. The stranger gestured a lot, his body language aggressive. Silas stood his ground, arms crossed, immovable. The conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes before the stranger left, his horse kicking up snow as he rode away. Silas came inside looking like he'd aged 5 years. "Who was that?" Marlowe asked. "Wade Mercer, owns the land north of here, wants to buy the ranch." "Are you selling?" "Not if I can help it, but Mercer's the kind of man who doesn't take no for an answer." Silas poured himself coffee with shaking hands. "He's been waiting for me to fail, probably celebrating the fact that I'm about to." "You're not failing." "The bank disagrees." "How much do you owe?" He told her. It was a staggering number, more money than Marlowe had ever seen in one place. "When's it due?" "End of January, 2 months." "That's not much time." "No." He drank his coffee in one long swallow. "Mercer offered to buy the ranch for half what it's worth and keep me on as a worker. Like I'd be grateful to work my own land for someone else." The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut. "There has to be another way," Marlowe said. "If there is, I haven't found it." She wanted to comfort him, to promise it would work out, but empty promises were worse than silence. Instead, she went back to cooking dinner, mind racing through possibilities. That night, after the girls were asleep, Marlowe sat at the table with paper and pencil. She wrote down everything she knew about the ranch's finances, everything Silas had mentioned in passing. The numbers were bad, but they weren't impossible. If they could recover the stolen cattle, if they could sell some assets, if they could cut costs further, it would be tight. It would require luck and perfect timing and no more disasters. But it might work. Marlowe worked until the lamp oil ran low, then went to bed with her mind still churning. She dreamed of numbers and cattle, and a man in a black coat who smiled like a predator. The next morning, she presented her calculations to Silas. He looked them over carefully, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he set the papers down and met her eyes. This could work. Maybe. It's better than maybe not. It requires finding the stolen cattle. Then we find them. We? His eyebrow raised. You planning to go hunting rustlers? I'm planning to help however I can. Silas shook his head, but he was almost smiling. You're either very brave or very foolish. Can't I be both? This time he did smile, a real one that reached his eyes. I suppose you can. They spent the next week implementing Marlowe's plan. Silas and the hand scoured the canyons looking for the missing cattle. Marlowe took inventory of everything sellable, contacted buyers through carefully worded letters, negotiated prices that made every dollar count. The girls helped without being asked, sensing the urgency. Emma organized supplies with surprising efficiency. Sarah kept detailed records in her careful handwriting. They were becoming a team, a family, almost. But the missing cattle remained missing, and January crept closer with every sunrise. Then, on a gray afternoon in early December, one of the hands rode in fast, his horse lathered with sweat. Found them, he gasped. The cattle. Boxed Canyon, about 15 miles west. Silas was already moving, grabbing his rifle, shouting orders. How many men guarding them? He asked. Couldn't tell. At least 3, maybe more. Get everyone ready. We leave in 10 minutes. Marlowe followed him to the barn. Let me come with you. Absolutely not. I can help. You can stay here and protect the girls. If this goes wrong, if Mercer's involved like I suspect, he might send men here. The thought sent ice through Marlowe's veins. You think he'd hurt children? I think desperate men do desperate things. Silas checked his rifle, his movements practiced and efficient. Keep the doors locked. Don't open them for anyone except me or the hands you know. If someone tries to force their way in, shoot first and ask questions later. I don't know how to shoot. He pulled a pistol from his belt and handed it to her. Point this end at whatever you want to stop. Pull the trigger, it's loaded. The gun was heavier than she expected, cold and solid in her hand. Silas, I have to do this, Marlowe. Those cattle are the difference between keeping this place and losing everything. I know, just be careful. Something passed between them, unspoken but real. Then Silas was gone, riding out with 6 men into the gathering dusk. Marlowe locked the doors and closed the shutters. The girls watched, wide-eyed and silent. Is Papa going to be okay? Sarah asked. He's going to try very hard to be. That's not the same thing. No, it's not. They ate a tense dinner, jumped at every sound. Marlowe kept the pistol close, checking and rechecking that the doors were secure. Night fell. Hours passed. The girls finally fell asleep on the sofa, curled together under a blanket. Marlowe sat in the dark, watching the windows, the pistol in her lap. Waiting. Sometime past midnight, she heard horses. Her heart hammered as she moved to the window, peering through the shutters. 5 riders. No, 6. They were moving slowly, exhausted. Silas was in front. Marlowe unlocked the door and stepped onto the porch, relief flooding through her. You're back. We're back. Silas dismounted stiffly. And we got the cattle, all of them. Anyone hurt? Few scrapes, nothing serious. Rustlers ran when they saw how many of us there were. Behind him, the hands were already heading to the bunkhouse, too tired to celebrate. Silas climbed the porch steps and stopped in front of Marlowe. In the lamplight spilling from the door, his face was drawn and dirty, but his eyes were alive. We might actually pull this off, he said. We will pull this off. He looked at the pistol still in her hand. Did you need it? No, but I would have used it if I had to. I believe you. He reached out and gently took the gun from her, their fingers brushing. Thank you. For staying. For protecting the girls. For... He trailed off. For what? For being here. For giving a damn when you didn't have to. Marlowe's throat tightened. Where else would I be? Silas held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, we start selling off those cattle. He went inside and Marlowe stood on the porch in the cold, watching the stars wheeling overhead. 1 month ago, she'd been stranded at a train station, convinced she had nothing left to hope for. Now she was standing on a frontier ranch with frost in her hair and a purpose in her chest, fighting for something that might actually be worth fighting for. The wind picked up, bitter and sharp. Marlowe turned and went inside where warmth and sleeping children and a future that wasn't promised but might be possible waited in the darkness. The cattle sale happened faster than Marlowe expected. Buyers came from 3 counties over, drawn by word that Silas Boon was selling quality stock at prices that wouldn't last. They arrived in wagons and on horseback, squinting at the herd with the skeptical eyes of men who'd been cheated before. Silas handled the negotiations himself, standing in the freezing mud with his hat pulled low, refusing to budge on numbers that Marlowe had calculated down to the last cent. She watched from the porch as he shook hands with buyers, as money changed ownership, as their chances of survival improved with each transaction. The girls watched too, Sarah pressing close to Marlowe's side, Emma standing apart with her arms crossed like she was daring the world to disappoint her again. "Is this enough?" Sarah whispered. "To keep the ranch?" "It's closer than we were yesterday," Marlowe said, which was the most honest answer she could give. By evening, half the herd was gone, and Silas's saddlebag was heavy with payment. He came inside looking exhausted, but less haunted than he'd been in weeks. "How much?" Marlowe asked. He told her. It was good. Not enough to clear the debt completely, but enough to buy them time and prove to the bank they were serious about repaying. "We'll make it work," Marlowe said. "We might." Silas pulled off his gloves and warmed his hands by the fire. "Bank manager's coming out next week. Wants to see the operation for himself before he agrees to extend the loan." "Then we'll show him an operation worth extending." Emma made a derisive sound. "What's he going to see? Half our cattle gone and everything falling apart?" "He's going to see a ranch that's fighting to survive," Marlowe said. "That counts for something." "Does it?" Emma's voice was sharp with the kind of cynicism that didn't belong in a 7-year-old. "Or does it just count that we have money?" Silas looked at his daughter with something like grief. "Both, probably. World's not fair, Emma. We've talked about this. Talking about it doesn't make it better." "No, but fighting makes it worse if you're fighting the wrong things." Emma didn't respond, just stalked off to her room. Sarah followed after a moment's hesitation, leaving Marlowe and Silas alone. "She's scared," Marlowe said quietly. "I know, so am I." Silas sat heavily in the chair by the fire. "Every time I think we're getting ahead, something else breaks, or someone else tries to take what little we have left. You got the cattle back. That was a win. A temporary one. Mercer's not done. Men like him never are." Marlowe had been thinking about Wade Mercer more than she wanted to admit. About his expensive coat and predator smile, about the way Silas's whole body had tensed when he arrived. "What does he want? Really?" "My land. The water rights that come with it. This valley's drying up and my property has 2 good springs that run year-round. Whoever controls the water controls everything else. So it's not personal. It's always personal when someone's trying to take your home." Silas rubbed his face tiredly. "My father died defending this ranch. My wife's buried on that hill behind the barn. This isn't just land to me." Marlowe understood that kind of attachment, even if she'd never had it herself. A place that mattered, a place worth fighting for. "Then we don't let him take it." Silas looked at her and something shifted in his expression. When did it become we? The question caught her off guard. "I don't know, sometime between burning the biscuits and learning to shoot, I guess." "You never burned the biscuits." "The first batch, before you were awake." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You fed those to the chickens, didn't you?" The chickens didn't complain. He actually laughed, a sound Marlowe was learning to treasure for its rarity. Then his expression sobered again. "Your month's almost up. Trial period ends in 4 days." Marlowe's stomach dropped. She'd been so focused on the ranch's survival that she'd stopped counting down her own deadline. "I know." "You planning to stay? Are you planning to let me?" "That depends. You happy here?" The question was absurd. Happy. Like happiness was something Marlowe had ever expected from life. She thought about cold mornings and difficult children and numbers that didn't want to add up right. Thought about small victories and hard work and the way this place had started to feel less like exile and more like home. "I'm useful here," she said finally. That's better than happy. Silas studied her for a long moment. You're more than useful, Marlowe. You're the only reason we're still standing. The words hit harder than they should have. Marlowe looked away, uncomfortable with praise she didn't know how to accept. The girls did most of the work. The girls followed your lead. Don't diminish what you've done. I'm just doing what needs doing. That's more than most people manage. Silas stood and moved closer, and Marlowe could smell wood smoke and leather and something else, something that was just him. Stay, please. Not on trial, for real. What about the money? You said you couldn't afford. I'll find a way. We'll find a way. His voice was firm. You belong here. The girls know it. I know it. The only person who doesn't seem to know it is you. Marlowe's throat was tight. I've never belonged anywhere. Well, now you do. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt terrifying, like standing on the edge of something she could fall from. What if I mess it up? The words came out small. What if I'm not enough? You are enough. You've always been enough. The world's just been too stupid to see it. Before Marlowe could respond, Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face tear-stained. Emma won't talk to me. She's mad about something and won't say what. Silas sighed. I'll talk to her. No. Marlowe stepped forward. Let me. She found Emma sitting on her bed, arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the wall with fierce concentration. Your sister's worried about you, Marlowe said from the doorway. Sarah worries about everything. Right now, she's worrying about you specifically. Can I come in? Emma shrugged, which Marlowe took as permission. She sat on the edge of Sarah's bed, facing Emma across the small space. You want to tell me what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Emma. The girl's jaw tightened. Everyone keeps saying things are going to be okay. But they said that before Mama died too. They said she'd be fine, and the baby would be fine, and then they were both gone, and nothing was fine ever again. The raw honesty of it stole Marlowe's breath. You're right, she said quietly. Sometimes people say things will be okay when they don't actually know, when they're just hoping. Emma looked at her, surprised. You're not going to tell me it's different this time? I can't promise you that. I can't promise the bank won't take the ranch, or that your father won't get hurt, or that I won't leave someday. Life doesn't come with those kinds of promises. Then what's the point? The point is we try anyway. We fight for the things that matter even when we're scared of losing them, because the alternative is giving up, and that's just losing slowly instead of all at once. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Are you scared? Terrified. Of what? Of staying, of leaving, of mattering to you and Sarah and your father, and then failing you somehow. Marlowe met the girl's eyes. Of being happy, and then having it taken away. That's a lot of scared. It is, but I'm doing it anyway. Emma's expression cracked slightly, showing the frightened child underneath the angry armor. What if the bank takes the ranch? Then we'll figure out what comes next. Together. What if you die like Mama did? The question hung in the air, heavy and terrible. I can't promise I won't, Marlowe said. Nobody can promise that. But I can promise that I'll do everything I can to stay alive and stay here with you. Is that enough? Emma thought about it, her young face serious. I guess it has to be. Yeah, I guess it does. The girl uncurled slightly, her defensive posture softening. Sarah really likes you. I really like Sarah. She wants you to be our new mama. Marlowe's heart stuttered. What do you want? Emma's eyes went shiny. I want my real mama back. I know, sweetheart, I know. But if I can't have that, Emma's voice broke. I guess I want you to stay too. Marlowe crossed the space between beds and pulled Emma into a hug. The girl resisted for maybe 2 seconds before collapsing into it, her small body shaking with sobs she'd probably been holding back for weeks. I'm so tired of being scared, Emma whispered. Me too. They stayed like that until Emma's crying quieted and Sarah crept in to join them, and then it was all three of them tangled together on the narrow bed, holding on like they could keep the world out through sheer force of will. Later that night, after the girls were finally asleep, Marlowe found Silas still awake, going through paperwork by lamplight. Emma okay? He asked. She will be. She's caring too much for someone her age. Gets that from me. Silas set down his pen. I should be better at talking to them about their mother. about feelings in general. You're doing fine. I'm doing what I can. It's not the same thing. He looked at Marlowe. What you did tonight, getting Emma to open up, that's not something I know how to do. You just have to be honest. Kids can smell a lie from a mile away. So can you, apparently. Marlowe smiled. Survival skill. When you grow up like I did, you learn to tell the difference between people who mean what they say and people who are just saying what they think you want to hear. Which one am I? The first kind. It's one of the things I like about you. The words hung between them, more intimate than Marlowe had intended. Silas's gaze held hers, and the air in the room felt suddenly charged. Marlowe! Whatever he'd been about to say was interrupted by the sound of breaking glass. They both moved instantly, Silas grabbing his rifle, Marlowe right behind him. The sound had come from the barn. Stay with the girls, Silas ordered. Not a chance. They ran across the frozen yard, breath fogging in the moonlight. The barn door hung open, swinging in the wind. Inside, horses stamped and snorted, agitated. One of the windows was shattered, glass scattered across the hay-strewn floor, and painted on the barn wall in something dark and dripping were the words, "Sell or burn." Marlowe's blood went cold. Mercer. Probably his men. He's too smart to do his own dirty work. Silas's voice was tight with rage. Check if anything's missing. I'll make sure they're gone. They searched quickly, efficiently. Nothing seemed to be stolen, but several feed sacks had been slashed open, grain spilling everywhere. More waste, more damage, more pressure. The ranch hands stumbled out of the bunkhouse, roused by the commotion. Silas sent 2 of them to patrol the perimeter while he and Marlowe secured the barn. This is a warning, Marlowe said, staring at the painted threat. It's more than a warning, it's a promise. Silas touched the wall, his fingers coming away red. That's blood, probably from a slaughtered animal. He's trying to scare you into selling. He's succeeding. Marlowe looked at him sharply. You're not actually considering it. I'm considering keeping my daughters safe. If Mercer's willing to do this, what's next? Fire? Violence? He won't hurt the girls. That would bring law enforcement down on him. You don't know that. You don't know what men like him are capable of. Then we go to the sheriff. Show him this. Silas laughed bitterly. The sheriff's in Mercer's pocket. Everyone knows it. Half the county's afraid of him. Then what do we do? I don't know. The admission seemed to cost him. For the first time since Elizabeth died, I genuinely don't know what to do. Marlowe stepped closer, lowering her voice so the hands couldn't hear. We don't give up. We don't give him the satisfaction. We double our guard, we secure the property, and we make it to that bank meeting. Once we get the loan extension, we'll have breathing room to figure out the rest. And if he burns us out before then we rebuild. But we don't hand him victory before he's actually won. Silas looked at her like he was seeing something he hadn't noticed before. You really believe that, don't you? That we can fight this? I've been fighting my whole life. I'm not about to stop now. Something in his expression gentled. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture almost absent-minded but achingly tender. What did I do to deserve you showing up when you did? Nothing. You just got lucky. Luckiest day of my life was finding you stranded at that station. The words settled into Marlowe's chest, warm and dangerous. She wanted to lean into his touch, to close the distance between them, to let herself want something just for herself, instead of always making do with whatever scraps the world tossed her way. But Emma's tear-stained face flashed in her mind, and Sarah's hopeful eyes, and the weight of responsibility that came with mattering to people. We should check on the girls, she said, stepping back. Silas's hand dropped. Yeah, you're right. They walked back to the house in charged silence. The girls were still asleep, oblivious to the threat painted on the barn wall. Marlowe sat in the chair between their beds, watching them breathe, while Silas took up position by the window with his rifle. Neither of them slept. Dawn came gray and cold. The ranch hands scrubbed the blood off the barn wall while Silas boarded up the broken window. Marlowe made breakfast for everyone, moving on autopilot, her mind racing through scenarios and possibilities. The bank manager was due in 3 days. 3 days to make the ranch look stable and profitable. 3 days to convince a skeptical man that they deserved more time. 3 days to keep Mercer from destroying everything they'd worked for. We need to make this place shine, Marlowe said to Silas over breakfast. Every fence mended, every building cleaned, every cow accounted for. The bank manager needs to see order, not chaos. That's a lot to do in 3 days. Then we'd better start now. They divided tasks and set to work. The hands focused on repairing fences and corralling the remaining cattle. Silas tackled the bigger repairs on the barn and outbuildings. Marlowe organized the house, scrubbing floors and washing windows, making sure everything looked cared for. The girls helped without being asked, Emma attacking chores with fierce determination, Sarah working quietly and carefully. They were scared but trying not to show it, and Marlowe's heart ached for them. On the second day, a wagon arrived carrying supplies Marlowe hadn't ordered. The driver handed her a note written in neat script. Heard you might need extra hands. These are on the house. Mrs. Chen. Inside were nails, paint, lamp oil, and fresh vegetables that must have cost a small fortune in December. Marlowe stood in the cold, staring at the supplies, feeling something hot and sharp behind her eyes. People were helping. People she barely knew were choosing to help. She carried the note to Silas, who read it twice before folding it carefully and tucking it in his pocket. I'll have to thank her when this is over, he said. When? Not if. When, he agreed. By the third day, the ranch looked better than it had in months. Paint fresh on the barn, fences straight and secure, equipment organized and maintained. It wouldn't fool an expert, but it might convince someone who wanted to be convinced. The bank manager arrived at noon in a buggy that looked too fine for the rough roads. He was a small man with wire-rimmed spectacles and the pinched expression of someone who smelled something unpleasant everywhere he went. Mr. Boon, he said, shaking Silas's hand without enthusiasm. I'm Nathaniel Pierce. Shall we get started? Silas showed him everything, the cattle, the buildings, the books Marlowe had organized into neat columns of income and expenses. Pierce asked pointed questions and took notes in a leather journal, his expression never changing from politely skeptical. Marlowe kept the girls inside, but she watched from the window, her stomach in knots. After an hour, Pierce returned to the house. Silas followed, his face unreadable. Mrs. Bennett, Pierce said, nodding to Marlowe. Miss Bennett. My apologies, Miss Bennett. He sat at the table without being invited. I've reviewed the property and the financials. I'll be honest with you both. This is not a promising situation. Marlowe's heart sank. However, Pierce continued, I can see you've made genuine efforts to improve your circumstances. The cattle sale was smart. Your organization is better than most operations twice this size, and frankly, the bank would rather extend your loan than foreclose and try to sell this property in the current market. Hope flickered. Silas leaned forward. So you'll extend? 6 months. You'll need to make interest payments monthly and demonstrate continued progress. If you default, we foreclose immediately. No second chances. That's fair. Is it? Pierce looked at them both. I'm also aware that Wade Mercer has expressed interest in purchasing this property. He's offered to buy your debt from the bank. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. What did you tell him? Silas's voice was carefully controlled. That the bank doesn't sell debts to private individuals, but he's persistent, and he has resources. Pierce closed his journal. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know what you're up against. Mercer wants this land, and he's not known for losing. Neither am I, Silas said. Pierce almost smiled. Good. You'll need that stubbornness. He stood, shaking Silas's hand again. 6 months, Mr. Boon. Make them count. After he left, Silas sat heavily at the table. Marlowe waited, giving him space to process. 6 months, he finally said. It's more than we had yesterday. It's 6 months of Mercer trying to destroy us. Then we spend 6 months not letting him. Silas looked at her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she saw something other than worry or exhaustion in his eyes. She saw belief. You really think we can do this? I know we can. He reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. Thank you. For everything. For being here, for caring about this place like it's yours. It is mine, Marlowe said, the truth of it surprising her. Somewhere along the way, it became mine too. The girls burst in then, Emma in the lead, demanding to know what the bankman had said. Silas explained while Marlowe started dinner, and for a few hours the house felt almost normal. But that night, lying in bed and listening to the wind, Marlowe couldn't shake the image of Mercer's painted threat. Sell or burn. 6 months was a long time to hold off someone who wanted you gone. But it was also 6 months to build something stronger than one man's greed. Marlowe closed her eyes and made herself a promise. Whatever came next, she would face it. She would fight for this place and these people with everything she had. Because, for the first time in her 28 years, she had something worth fighting for. And nobody, not Mercer, not the bank, not her own doubts, was going to take that away without one hell of a battle. Winter deepened into January with the kind of cold that made breathing hurt. Marlowe learned to layer wool over flannel over cotton until she could barely move her arms, learned to break ice on the water trough every morning, learned the particular silence that came before a blizzard hit. She also learned that Wade Mercer was a patient man when it came to cruelty. The attacks came in small ways at first. A fence cut here, allowing cattle to wander onto neighboring property where they'd be impounded. A wheel damaged on the supply wagon, causing Silas to lose half a day's work. Rumors circulating in town that the Boon ranch was cursed, that anyone who worked there would end up unemployed or worse. 2 ranch hands quit within a week of each other. The remaining crew grew jumpy, starting at shadows, talking in low voices about bad luck and signs. Silas replaced the hands as best he could, but good workers were hard to find in winter, and the ones willing to work for what he could pay weren't always reliable. A man named Collins showed up drunk 3 days in a row before Silas fired him. Another, younger and green, lasted exactly 1 shift before riding out and never coming back. "This is what Mercer wants," Marlowe said, watching yet another hired hand pack his belongings. "He's making it impossible to keep the ranch running." "It's working." Silas's voice was flat with exhaustion. They were in the barn, mucking out stalls that should have been someone else's job, but there was no one else left to do it. "We're down to 4 hands." 4. "That's not enough to manage what we have." "Then we manage with 4. "Marlowe, be realistic. Spring calving is coming. Fences need constant repair. The well pump is threatening to give out. I can't do this with 4 men. "Then we hire locals, people from town." "With what money? We're barely making interest payments as it is." Marlowe drove her shovel into the dirty hay with more force than necessary. She was tired too, bone-deep tired from weeks of fighting uphill battles, but giving up wasn't an option. "What about the women?" she asked. Silas looked at her like she'd suggested hiring ghosts. "What women?" "In town, in the valley. There have to be women who need work. Widows, spinsters, wives whose husbands can't find jobs. Ranching's hard labor. Most women work harder than most men and get paid half as much for it," Marlowe interrupted. "I've spent my whole life watching women do impossible things because they had no choice. Don't tell me they can't handle cattle and fences." Silas leaned on his shovel, considering. "Even if you're right, Mercer would see it as weakness. A ranch run by women. Let him. While he's busy laughing, we'll be getting work done." Something shifted in Silas's expression. Not quite hope, but maybe the beginning of it. "You really think this could work?" "I think we're out of better options." They rode into Granger the next day, leaving the girls with the most trustworthy hand, a man named Daniel who'd worked for Silas's father and refused to abandon ship no matter how bad things got. The town looked smaller in winter, buildings huddled against the cold like they were trying to disappear. Marlowe and Silas went to the boarding house first, where Mrs. Chen greeted them with knowing eyes. "You look terrible," she told Silas without preamble. "Nice to see you too." "I'm serious. You're going to work yourself into an early grave." She turned to Marlowe. "Both of you, sit. I'll make tea." They sat at the dining room table while Mrs. Chen bustled in the kitchen. When she returned with 3 cups of something that smelled like herbs and honey, she fixed them both with a stern look. "Now, what do you need?" "Workers," Marlowe said. "Women, preferably. Anyone willing to work hard for fair pay and not run scared when things get difficult." Mrs. Chen's eyebrows rose. "You're hiring women for ranch work?" "Unless you know where we can find men who aren't afraid of Wade Mercer." "Ah." Mrs. Chen sipped her tea. "So it's like that." "It's exactly like that," Silas said. "Mercer's making sure no one in the valley will work for me. I'm desperate enough to try something different. Different like hiring women who've been told their whole lives they're not strong enough to do real work." Different, like giving opportunities to people who actually need them, instead of people looking for easy money. Mrs. Chen smiled, sharp and satisfied. I know 3 women who'd be interested. One's a widow with 2 boys to feed. Another lost her husband to pneumonia last fall. The third never married, and everyone treats her like she's invisible because she's not pretty enough. The last description hit Marlowe in the chest. She knew exactly what that invisibility felt like. Can you send them to the ranch? She asked. We'll explain what the work involves and what we can pay. I can do better than that. I'll bring them myself. Day after tomorrow? Silas nodded. We'll be ready. They left the boarding house and walked Main Street, looking for supplies they couldn't quite afford but desperately needed. The general store was warm and crowded, and the moment they entered, conversations died. People stared, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed contempt. Marlowe felt the weight of their judgment like stones piling on her shoulders. The shopkeeper, Mr. Patterson, greeted Silas politely enough, but kept glancing at Marlowe like he wasn't sure what to make of her. Heard you're having trouble keeping workers, Patterson said while measuring out nails. Word travels fast. Small town, hard to keep secrets. Patterson wrapped the nails in brown paper. Also heard Mercer's been asking around about your property, offering good money for information. What kind of information? How many cattle you got left? How much debt you're carrying, whether you're planning to sell? Patterson's expression was carefully neutral. I told him I don't discuss customers' business. I appreciate that. Don't appreciate it too much. Not everyone in town is as principled. He pushed the package across the counter. Watch your back, Boon. Mercer's got friends everywhere. They loaded their meager supplies into the wagon in silence. Marlowe could feel eyes on them from windows and doorways, could hear the whispers that always seemed to follow her. You okay? Silas asked as they climbed into the wagon. Fine. You're clenching your jaw so hard I can hear your teeth grinding. Marlowe forced herself to relax. Just tired of being stared at. People stare because they're small-minded and scared of anything different. That's a generous interpretation. Most people stare because I'm fat, and they think it's their right to have opinions about my body. Silas went still. That bothers you. Of course it bothers me. It's bothered me every day of my life. I didn't mean... He stopped, searching for words. I just meant that I don't see you that way. I never have. How do you see me? The question came out more vulnerable than Marlowe intended. Silas looked at her, really looked, his blue eyes intense in the winter light. I see someone who showed up when everyone else ran away. Someone who fights for what matters and doesn't quit when things get hard. Someone my daughters trust and I trust, and who makes everything better just by being there. Marlowe's throat was tight. That's a lot to live up to. You're already doing it. He reached over and took her hand, his touch warm even through their gloves. I know the world's been cruel to you. I know people have judged you for things that don't matter, but you matter, Marlowe. You matter to me. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let those words sink in and heal something broken inside her. But years of disappointment had taught her to be careful with hope. We should get back, she said quietly. Before dark. Silas nodded and released her hand, but the warmth of his touch lingered long after they started the journey home. The ranch was quiet when they returned. Too quiet. Daniel met them in the yard, his face grim. What happened? Silas asked, already moving toward the house. Girls are fine, but we had visitors while you were gone. Mercer? His men, 3 of them, said they were just passing through, but they spent an awful lot of time looking at the fences and buildings, making notes. Marlowe's blood ran cold. Did they threaten anyone? Not directly, just made comments about how dry everything is. How easy it would be for a fire to start in weather like this. Silas's jaw clenched. Where are the girls now? Inside with Mary. Mary was Daniel's wife, a solid woman who'd helped occasionally with cooking and mending. I told them to stay put until you got back. They found Emma and Sarah in the kitchen playing cards with Mary. Both girls looked up when Silas entered, and Emma immediately asked, Was it Mercer's men? How did you know? Because you look like you want to hit something. Emma set down her cards. Daniel told us to stay inside. We did. Good girl. Silas pulled both daughters into a hug. You're both okay? We're fine, Papa. They didn't even come to the door. But Sarah's hands were shaking, Marlowe noticed. The younger girl was better at hiding her fear than her sister, but it was there all the same. After Mary and Daniel left, after the girls were sent to bed despite their protests, Silas and Marlowe sat by the fire and faced the truth they'd been avoiding. "He's going to burn us out," Silas said. "That's the plan. Wait until we're stretched thin, then set fire to everything and make it look like an accident. So we don't let him." "How?" "I can't watch every fence line every minute. I can't guard the house and the barn and the cattle all at once." "No. But we can make it harder for him. Clear brush away from buildings, keep water barrels full and ready, sleep in shifts so someone's always awake." Silas rubbed his face tiredly. "This is no way to live. It's the way we have to live until we're strong enough that he can't touch us. And when do we get strong enough? We're barely surviving as it is." Marlowe stood and moved to the window, staring out at the dark landscape. Somewhere out there, Wade Mercer was probably sitting in a warm house, drinking expensive whiskey, confident that the Boon Ranch would be his by spring. The thought made her furious. "We get stronger by not breaking," she said, "by showing up every day and doing the work even when it feels impossible, by being too stubborn to quit. That's just surviving, not living. Sometimes surviving is enough." Silas came to stand beside her. His reflection in the dark window was tired and worn, but there was still fight in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I brought you into this mess. You could have gone back east, found easier work, had a normal life." "I didn't want a normal life. I wanted this one." "Even now? Even knowing what you know?" Marlowe turned to face him. "Especially now, because this is real. The danger is real. The struggle is real, but so is everything else. The girls, the ranch, you. This matters in a way nothing in my old life ever did." Silas looked at her like he was memorizing her face. Then slowly, he reached up and cupped her cheek with his rough hand. "I'm falling in love with you," he said. "I know the timing's terrible, and we're in the middle of a crisis, and I have no business putting that on you right now, but I need you to know. You're not just the woman who helps with my daughters. You're not just the person who keeps this ranch running. You're the first thing I think about in the morning and the last thing on my mind at night, and I'm falling in love with you whether it makes sense or not." Marlowe's heart was hammering so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts. Part of her wanted to run, to protect herself from the inevitable disappointment. But a bigger part, the part that had learned to be brave in small daily ways, wanted to stay. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I've never had anyone love me before." "Then we'll figure it out together." He kissed her then, soft and tentative, like he was afraid she might disappear. Marlowe kissed him back, pouring every lonely year and every small hope into that contact, letting herself believe for just a moment that she was allowed to have this. When they pulled apart, Silas was smiling, really smiling, not the tired half expression she'd gotten used to. "Stay with me," he said, "not as hired help, as my partner. Help me build something here that's worth all this fighting." "I'm already staying." "I mean permanently. I mean, marry me when this is over and we're not in crisis mode. I mean, build a life together." It was too much too fast, and exactly what Marlowe hadn't known she wanted. She thought about the girls sleeping down the hall, about the ranch that had become home, about this man who saw her clearly and still wanted her anyway. "Yes," she said. "When this is over, when we're safe, ask me again and I'll say yes. I'll hold you to that." They stood together at the window, watching for threats that might or might not come. And for the first time since Marlowe had arrived, the future felt like something other than a question mark. 2 days later, Mrs. Chen arrived with 3 women in tow. The widow was named Ruth, a thin woman with hard eyes and capable hands. The other widow, Margaret, was older and moved slowly but with determination. The unmarried woman was called Jane, and she had the hunched shoulders of someone who'd spent years trying to take up less space. Marlowe recognized that posture. She'd worn it herself for most of her life. Silas explained the work, mending fences, tending cattle, general ranch maintenance. He was honest about the danger, about Mercer's threats, about the fact that he couldn't guarantee their safety. "But I can guarantee fair pay," he finished, "and respect. You work hard. You'll be treated like the professionals you are." Ruth spoke first. "What about housing?" "Bunkhouse is half empty right now. You'd share with the other hands, but there's a separate section you could curtain off for privacy. And if Mercer's men come around making trouble, then you defend yourselves same as anyone else. I'll teach you to shoot if you don't know how." The three women exchanged glances. Then Jane spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. "When do we start?" They started that afternoon. Silas and Daniel showed them the property, explained the systems, handed out tools. Marlowe worked alongside them, partly to help and partly to show that a woman could do this work and do it well. Ruth proved to be a natural with animals, calm and patient in ways that settled nervous cattle. Margaret had a head for numbers and organization, immediately spotting inefficiencies in their supply system. Jane was strongest, surprisingly so, and attacked physical labor with the intensity of someone trying to prove something. By evening, Marlowe's back ached and her hands were raw, but the ranch felt different, fuller, like they might actually have a chance. That night, she helped Jane settle into the bunkhouse. The younger woman moved around the space cautiously, like she expected someone to tell her she didn't belong. "You did good work today," Marlowe said. Jane shrugged. "It's just work." "It's not. It's work people told you that you couldn't do and you're doing it anyway. That counts for something." Jane looked at her directly for the first time. "People say things about you too, in town." "I know. Do you care?" Marlowe thought about it. "I used to. Now I care more about what I think of myself than what strangers think of me." "How'd you get there?" "By being too tired to care anymore, and by finding people who saw me clearly and still decided I was worth keeping around." Marlowe smiled. "You're worth keeping around too, Jane. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Jane's eyes went shiny. She nodded once, quick and sharp, then turned away before the emotion could spill over. Marlowe left her alone and walked back to the house. Inside, Silas was reading to the girls, his deep voice stumbling over complicated words while Emma corrected his pronunciation. Sarah was already half asleep, curled against her father's side. This was what Marlowe was fighting for. Not just survival, but these small moments of normal in the middle of chaos. These pieces of belonging. She caught Silas's eye over the girls' heads, and he smiled at her, that private smile that made her feel seen and wanted and possible. The attacks continued through January, escalating in boldness. Cattle were driven into ravines. Equipment went missing or turned up broken. Twice, fires started in the dry grass near the property line, and only quick action kept them from spreading. But the ranch held. The new workers proved reliable and brave, showing up day after day despite the danger. Ruth's son started helping after school, doing odd jobs for pennies. Margaret's organizational skills cut their supply costs by a third. Jane became their best fence mender, working methodically through miles of damaged wire. Slowly, stubbornly, they stopped bleeding resources. The interest payments got made on time. The cattle stayed healthy through the brutal cold. The buildings stayed standing. And Wade Mercer, watching from his comfortable distance, must have realized that fear alone wasn't going to break them, which meant he'd have to try something else. The warning came from an unexpected source. One of Mercer's own ranch hands, a young man barely out of his teens, rode up to the Boon property on a February afternoon and asked to speak to Silas privately. Marlowe watched from the porch as they talked by the barn, the young man gesturing urgently, Silas's expression growing darker with every word. When the conversation ended, the hand rode off quickly, looking over his shoulder like he expected pursuit. Silas came to the house walking like a man heading toward his own execution. "What did he say?" Marlowe asked. "Mercer's planning something big. Something that'll end this one way or another." Silas's voice was hollow. "He's got men coming in from out of territory, professionals, and they're not coming to vandalize fences." "When?" "Soon, maybe a week." The kid wasn't sure exactly. Marlowe's stomach dropped. "We need to go to the law." "The law won't help, you know that." "Then we get everyone off the property, send the girls somewhere safe, evacuate the workers, and just hand Mercer the ranch? Let him win by default?" "Better than dying for it." Silas grabbed her shoulders, his grip almost desperate. "This ranch is all I have left of my father. All my daughters have left of their mother. If I give it up without a fight, what am I teaching them? That bullies always win? That you run when things get hard? You're teaching them that their father is alive. That's what matters." "It's not enough." His voice cracked. "I need them to know I fought for what was theirs. That I didn't just roll over and let someone take everything we built." Marlowe understood that stubbornness, that need to mean something in a world that tried to make you nothing. But she also understood that dead men didn't raise daughters. Then we fight smart, she said, not just brave. We use everything we have, the women, the ranch hands, the town connections. We make it so hard for Mercer that winning costs more than he's willing to pay. How? I don't know yet, but we have a week to figure it out. They called a meeting that night. Everyone who worked the ranch, everyone who had a stake in its survival. 12 people crowded into the small house, sitting on chairs and floor space, united by desperation and something fiercer. Silas explained the situation plainly. Mercer was coming. They could run or they could fight. I won't judge anyone who leaves, he said. This isn't your fight. You don't owe me your life. Nobody moved. Ruth spoke first. My husband died because he was too proud to ask for help when he needed it. I won't make that mistake. We're stronger together than apart. Daniel nodded. Been working Boone land for 30 years. Not about to abandon it now. One by one, they pledged to stay. Even Jane, who'd been there the shortest time, squared her shoulders and said, I'm tired of running from bullies. Might as well make a stand somewhere. Marlowe looked around the room at these unlikely allies, widows and orphans and people the world had discarded, and felt something ignite in her chest. Then let's give Mercer a fight he won't forget, she said. They spent the next week preparing, not for passive defense, but for active resistance. They rigged alarms on the fence lines, bells that would ring if anyone cut the wire. They stocked every building with water and shower for fighting fires. They practiced with rifles until even Sarah could hit a target at 20 yards. Marlowe wrote letters to everyone she could think of who might help. The territorial marshal, newspapers in Denver, anyone who might care that a powerful man was trying to steal land from a struggling family. She didn't know if any of them would help, but she had to try. The attack came on a night so cold that breathing felt like swallowing knives. Marlowe was on watch, pacing the perimeter with a rifle she'd learned to use but still didn't trust, when she saw the first flicker of light on the horizon. Too many lights, moving too deliberately. She rang the alarm bell, the sound cutting through the frozen silence. Within seconds, the ranch erupted into action. People poured from buildings, grabbing buckets and weapons, taking positions they'd practiced a dozen times. The lights grew closer, resolving into torches carried by men on horseback. Marlowe counted at least 15 riders, maybe more hanging back in the darkness. Silas appeared at her side, his face grim. Here we go. The riders stopped just beyond rifle range. One man rode forward alone, and even in the darkness, Marlowe recognized Wade Mercer's expensive coat. Boone, he called out, let's talk like reasonable men. Nothing reasonable about burning people out of their homes, Silas called back. I'm offering you one last chance. Sell me the property for a fair price. Walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else. No one gets hurt. And if I refuse? Mercer's smile was visible even at this distance. Then we settle this the frontier way. I've got 15 men with me. How many do you have? Silas didn't answer immediately. Marlowe could see him calculating, weighing odds that didn't favor them. Then Emma's voice cut through the darkness, young and fierce and unafraid. He's got us! The girls stepped out of the house where they were supposed to be hiding, moving to stand with their father. Behind them came Ruth and Margaret and Jane, then Daniel and his wife, then the ranch hands and everyone else who'd chosen to stay. 12 people against 15. But they stood together, unified, and somehow that made the numbers feel less important. Mercer's smile faltered. You'd risk children for this? I'd teach my children to fight for what's theirs, Silas said. Seems like something you never learned. For a long moment, nothing moved. The two groups faced each other across the frozen ground, breath fogging in the torchlight, waiting to see who would break first. Then from behind Mercer's men, more lights appeared. Wagons and riders coming from the direction of town. Marlowe's heart leaped as she recognized Mrs. Chen in the lead wagon, with what looked like half of Granger following behind her. What's this? Mercer demanded. This is people who are tired of you running this valley like you own it, Mrs. Chen called out. You want the Boone Ranch? You'll have to go through all of us. More townspeople were arriving every minute, drawn by messages Marlowe had sent, by stories of what was happening, by the simple fact that bullies eventually push too far and people remember how to push back. Mercer's men were looking around nervously now, outnumbered and outflanked. Mercer himself sat rigid on his horse, his face twisted with rage. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Yeah," Silas said quietly. "It is." Mercer wheeled his horse around and rode away, his men following in confused disorder. The townspeople let them go, then turned toward the ranch, and suddenly everyone was talking and laughing and celebrating like they'd just won a war. Maybe they had. Marlowe found herself swept up in the chaos, people shaking her hand and clapping her shoulder and thanking her for the letters that had rallied them. Silas was somewhere in the crowd, accepting congratulations with the bemused expression of someone who couldn't quite believe what had just happened. The girls found Marlowe and attached themselves to her sides, Emma on the left and Sarah on the right, holding on like they were afraid she'd disappear. "You were supposed to stay inside," Marlowe said, but there was no heat in it. "We're part of this family," Emma said. "We don't hide." Sarah nodded agreement. "Besides, you needed us." They were right. Marlowe had needed them, needed all of them, needed this proof that standing together was stronger than standing alone. Mrs. Chen appeared with hot coffee somehow, passing cups around to everyone. When she reached Marlowe, she paused. "You did good," she said simply. "I just wrote some letters." "You gave people a reason to care. That's more than most manage," Mrs. Chen smiled. "Welcome to Granger, Marlowe Bennett. You're one of us now." The words settled into Marlowe's chest, warm and solid and real. One of us. She belonged here. Not because she'd transformed herself into someone different, but because she'd stood up when it mattered, and people had stood up with her. The celebration continued into the early morning hours, fueled by relief and coffee and the giddy realization that they'd actually won. When the townspeople finally dispersed and the ranch grew quiet again, Marlowe found Silas on the porch, staring out at the dawn. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Too keyed up." He looked at her, and his smile was tired but genuine. "We did it. We actually did it." "We did, though I'm not sure Mercer's going to just give up. He'll try other angles, legal pressure maybe, or economic sabotage. But he won't try this again. He knows now that the whole valley's watching." Silas pulled her close, and Marlowe let herself lean into his warmth. "Thank you. For everything. For the letters. For the plan. For being brave enough to make people care. I was terrified the whole time. Bravery doesn't mean not being scared, it means being scared and doing it anyway." They stood together, watching the sun rise over land they'd fought to keep. Behind them, the house was full of sleeping people. The girls in their room, the workers in the bunkhouse, Ruth and Margaret and Jane, who'd become something more than employees. Family. This was family, cobbled together from broken pieces and desperate choices and the simple stubborn refusal to quit. "Ask me now," Marlowe said quietly. Silas looked at her confused. "Ask you what?" "What you asked before. When all this was over." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "We're not out of the woods yet. Still got debts to pay, still got Mercer to worry about. I don't care. Ask me now." Silas turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. In the golden morning light, he looked younger somehow, less worn down by the weight he'd been carrying. "Marlowe Bennett," he said, "will you marry me? Will you build this life with me, raise these girls with me, fight every battle that comes our way by my side?" "Yes," Marlowe said, and felt the word reshape her entire future. "Yes to all of it." He kissed her then, sweet and thorough and full of promises neither of them knew if they could keep, but were going to try for anyway. When they pulled apart, Emma was standing in the doorway with Sarah peering around her shoulder. "About time," Emma said, trying to sound unimpressed and failing completely. "We've been waiting for you two to figure it out for weeks." Sarah ran to them, wrapping her arms around both Marlowe and Silas. "Does this mean Marlowe's staying forever?" "If she'll have us," Silas said. "I'll have you," Marlowe promised, looking at the three faces that had become her whole world. "All of you, for as long as you'll let me." Emma tried to maintain her tough exterior for maybe 3 more seconds before crumbling and joining the hug. They stood there in a tangled knot of family, watching the sun climb higher and the new day begin, and for the first time in her entire life, Marlowe Bennett felt like she'd finally come home. The wedding happened on a Saturday in late March, when the snow was finally melting and the first green shoots were pushing through the frozen ground. They held it at the ranch because neither Marlowe nor Silas wanted anything fancy. and because the land itself felt like the only witness that mattered. Mrs. Chen made a cake that leaned slightly to one side but tasted like heaven. Ruth and Margaret strung wildflowers across the porch railings. Jane, who turned out to have a decent singing voice, led everyone in songs that were more enthusiastic than melodic. The girls wore new dresses that Marlowe had sewn from fabric she could barely afford, and they stood beside her during the ceremony like they were giving her away instead of the other way around. Emma held Marlowe's hand the entire time, squeezing hard whenever her eyes got too shiny. Sarah kept whispering, "You look pretty," until Silas gently shushed her. The circuit judge who performed the ceremony was a practical man who kept the whole thing under 10 minutes, which suited everyone fine. When he pronounced them married, Silas kissed Marlowe like he was sealing a promise, and the gathered crowd cheered loud enough to scatter the chickens. Afterward, there was food and dancing and the kind of celebration that came from people who'd survived something together. Daniel played a battered fiddle while his wife sang. The ranch hands taught the townspeople complicated steps that nobody could quite master. Even the bank manager, Nathaniel Pierce, showed up with a bottle of whiskey and a rare smile. "Congratulations, Mrs. Boon," he said to Marlowe, and the name felt strange and wonderful in her ears. "Thank you for coming. Wouldn't miss it. You're the talk of the territory, you know. Woman who stood down Wade Mercer and lived to tell about it." Pierce took a sip of his whiskey. "Also wanted to tell you that Mercer's been making noise about challenging your land titles. Legal trouble instead of the violent kind." Marlowe's stomach tightened. "Can he do that?" "He can try. But between you and me, his case is weak. And after what happened, he's got the territorial marshal watching him closely. He steps out of line, he'll have federal problems." Pierce raised his glass. "You made this valley safer for everyone. That counts for something." He wandered off to join the dancing, leaving Marlowe with the uncomfortable knowledge that the fight wasn't completely over. It might never be completely over. But at least now they had allies and legal ground to stand on. Silas found her a few minutes later, pulling her into a dance despite her protests that she didn't know how. "Neither do I," he said, spinning her clumsily. "We'll figure it out together." They bumped into other couples and stepped on each other's feet and laughed until Marlowe's sides hurt. When the song ended, Silas kept holding her close, his breath warm against her ear. "Happy?" he asked. "Terrified," Marlowe admitted. "But yeah, happy too." "Good, because you're stuck with us now." "I can think of worse places to be stuck." The celebration continued until the sun set and exhaustion finally drove people home or to their beds. The girls fell asleep on the sofa, tangled together like puppies. Silas carried them one at a time to their room, and Marlowe followed, tucking blankets around their small bodies. "Love you, Mama," Sarah mumbled, half asleep. The word hit Marlowe like a physical blow. Mama. She'd been called many things in her life, but never that. Never something so precious and permanent. "Love you too, sweetheart," she whispered, and meant it with every broken piece of her heart. In their own room, finally alone, Silas and Marlowe stood looking at each other like they weren't quite sure what happened next. "This is strange," Marlowe said. "Good strange or bad strange?" "Just strange. I've never shared a room with anyone before." "Never? Boarding houses don't count. This is different. This is permanent." Silas crossed to her and cupped her face in his calloused hands. "You can still change your mind. If this is too much, if you need time—" "I don't want time. I want this. I'm just not used to getting things I want." "Then get used to it, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you get exactly what you deserve." They made love that night with a tenderness that surprised them both. Two people who'd spent so long being careful, finally allowing themselves to be reckless. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Silas's arm around her waist, Marlowe stared at the ceiling and tried to understand how her life had transformed so completely. 6 months ago, she'd been nobody, invisible, disposable. Now she was a wife, a mother, a woman people respected and relied on. The change was so profound it didn't feel real. "Stop thinking so loud," Silas murmured. "I can hear your brain working from here. Just trying to figure out when I'm going to wake up and this will all be gone." "It's not going anywhere, and neither are you." He pulled her closer. "We fought too hard for this to lose it to your doubts." He was right, but doubt was a hard habit to break. Spring brought the hard work of calving season. The new calves arrived bloody and wet and bawling, And Marlowe learned to help pull difficult births, to bottle feed the ones whose mothers rejected them, to stay up all night monitoring heifers in labor. Her hands were constantly raw and chapped. Her back ached from bending over newborns. She smelled like manure and milk and exhaustion. She'd never been happier. The ranch was expanding in small ways. More cattle, better fences, a new well that actually worked properly. Ruth's sons were working full-time now, saving money for their own futures. Margaret had taken over the books completely, her neat handwriting tracking every dollar in and out. Jane was courting one of the ranch hands, a quiet man who looked at her like she hung the stars. Even the bank was cooperating. Pierce had extended their loan again, this time with better terms, acknowledging that the Boon Ranch was profitable and well managed. The monthly payments were still tight, but they were manageable. Everything was moving in the right direction, which was probably why Wade Mercer chose May to make his next move. The lawsuit arrived by courier on a Tuesday morning. Mercer was challenging the water rights to the springs on Boone property, claiming his land had historical access that predated Silas's ownership. If he won, he could legally divert the water, effectively destroying the ranch's viability. Silas read through the documents with a lawyer from Granger, a sharp woman named Catherine Mills, who'd agreed to take the case for a percentage of future profits. "He's reaching," Catherine said, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "The claim is weak, but he's got expensive lawyers from Denver and they know how to drag things out." "How long?" Marlowe asked. "Could be months, maybe a year, and it'll cost money we don't have to fight it properly." Silas slumped in his chair. "So we win against his violence and lose to his lawyers anyway?" "Not necessarily." Catherine tapped one of the documents. "His claim relies on a survey from 1867 that supposedly shows the springs on his property. But I've looked at the territorial records, and I can't find that survey anywhere. If it doesn't exist, his case collapses." "Where would we find it?" "Territorial Archive in Denver. Someone would need to go through years of records to confirm it's missing." Marlowe and Silas exchanged glances. "It's someone being us?" Marlowe said. "Unless you've got money to pay researchers, yes." They didn't have that money. They barely had money for Catherine's services. "How long would we need to be in Denver?" Silas asked. "Week, maybe 2. The archives are extensive and poorly organized." Catherine gathered her papers. "I know it's an imposition, but it's our best shot." After she left, Silas and Marlowe sat in silence, weighing impossible options. Leave the ranch for 2 weeks during the busiest season, or lose it to legal manipulation. "I'll go," Marlowe said. "Alone?" "No. You're needed here. The ranch can't run without you." "It can't run without you either." "Yes, it can. Ruth and Margaret know the systems. Daniel can handle the day-to-day. The girls will be fine for 2 weeks." Silas looked like he wanted to argue, but they both knew she was right. The ranch needed him here. And Marlowe was better suited to careful, detailed work anyway. "I don't like it," he said finally. "Neither do I. But we're out of better options." She left 3 days later on the morning stage, her small bag packed with 2 dresses and the determination to save everything they'd built. The girls cried when she hugged them goodbye, and Silas held her so tight she could barely breathe. "Come back safe," he said. "I will. 2 weeks. I promise." The journey to Denver took 2 days of brutal stage travel, her body jostled and bruised by every rut in the road. The city, when she finally arrived, was overwhelming. Noise and crowds and buildings so tall they blocked the sun. Marlowe found a cheap boarding house that smelled like cabbage and rented a room barely bigger than a closet. Then she went to the Territorial Archive and explained what she needed. The clerk, a bored young man with ink-stained fingers, looked at her like she'd asked him to move a mountain. "Records from 1867? Lady, that's thousands of documents. You got a month to search?" "I've got 2 weeks." "Then you better work fast." The archive was a nightmare of poorly labeled boxes and water-damaged papers. Marlowe started at dawn each day and worked until the building closed, her eyes burning from deciphering faded handwriting, her back screaming from hunching over documents. She found surveys from 1866, from 1868, from 1870, but nothing from 1867 that covered the relevant territory. After a week, she was ready to scream with frustration. The document either didn't exist, or it was misfiled somewhere in the chaos, or it had been destroyed years ago. Without proof of its absence, Catherine couldn't dismiss Mercer's claim. On the 8th day, Marlowe was searching through a box labeled Miscellaneous 1860s when she found something interesting. A letter from a surveyor to the territorial office, dated 1867, apologizing for the loss of several survey maps in a fire. The letter included a list of the lost surveys. Marlowe's hands shook as she read through the list. There, property survey for the Northwest Valley region, including water sources and spring locations, lost to fire, never recreated. It was proof that Mercer's survey had never existed, that his claim was based on a document that literally didn't exist. She paid to have the letter copied and authenticated, then sent a telegram to Catherine before collapsing in her boarding house room, too exhausted to even take off her shoes. The next morning, she started the journey home. The stage seemed even slower on the return trip, every mile an eternity when all she wanted was to see her family again. She arrived at the ranch after dark on a Friday, 2 weeks exactly since she'd left. The house was lit up and warm, and before she could even climb down from the wagon, the door flew open and the girls came running. "Mama! Mama's home!" They crashed into her, nearly knocking her over, talking over each other about everything that had happened while she was gone. Silas followed more slowly, but his smile was bright enough to light the whole valley. "You found it?" he asked. "I found proof it never existed. Catherine says it's enough." He pulled her into a kiss that made the girls giggle and complain in equal measure. "I knew you would. You're the smartest person I've ever met." "I'm just stubborn." "That too." Catherine was right. The letter was enough. Mercer's lawyers tried to argue around it, but without the survey to back their claim, the case fell apart. The judge dismissed it within a month, and this time, Mercer didn't appeal. He sold his property that summer and left the territory entirely, moving back east where his money would impress people who didn't know better. The valley breathed easier without him. The ranch thrived over the next year. Good weather, good prices, good luck for once instead of bad. They paid down the debt faster than expected, hired more workers, expanded the herd. Marlowe started something new in the fall, a program that brought women to the ranch to learn skills that would make them employable. Widows who needed trades, young women with no prospects, even a few who'd fled bad situations and needed a place to rebuild. She taught them animal husbandry, basic veterinary care, bookkeeping, fence repair. Practical skills that could translate into jobs or their own operations. Some stayed only a few weeks, others stayed months, becoming part of the extended ranch family. "You're building something important here," Catherine told her during one visit. She'd become a friend beyond just being their lawyer. "Changing lives." "I'm just giving people the chances I never had." That's exactly what makes it important. The girls grew like weeds, Emma shooting up tall and staying fierce, Sarah remaining gentle but finding her own quiet strength. They called Marlowe Mama without hesitation now, and Marlowe had stopped waiting for the moment it would feel wrong. It felt right. It felt earned. On their first wedding anniversary, Silas gave Marlowe a gift wrapped in worn cloth. Inside was a brand, the kind used to mark cattle as belonging to a specific ranch. But this brand was different. It bore 2 sets of initials intertwined, SB and MB. "It's our brand now," Silas said. "Not just mine, ours. Everything we build from here, we build together." Marlowe traced the metal with her fingers, feeling the weight of what he was offering. Partnership, equality, recognition that she'd earned her place here through sweat and stubbornness, and refusing to quit when quitting would have been easier. "Together," she agreed. They used the new brand for the first time that spring, marking calves born to the herd they'd fought so hard to keep. Each mark was a declaration. This belongs to us, and you can't take it away. Emma wanted to learn how to use the brand herself. Marlowe taught her, guiding her hands, showing her how to apply just enough pressure without causing unnecessary pain. "Why do we mark them?" Emma asked. "So everyone knows they're ours. So if they wander, they can find their way home. Like you did. You wandered here and found home." Marlowe looked at this girl who'd been so angry and scared when they first met, who'd grown into someone confident and clear-eyed and kind when it mattered. "Yeah," she said softly, "exactly like that." Sarah started writing stories that spring, elaborate tales about brave women having adventures. She'd read them aloud at dinner, and everyone would listen like it was the most important thing in the world. Because it was. Because this girl who'd been so afraid of loss had found a way to create something that couldn't be taken from her. The ranch became known throughout the territory as a place where people could rebuild, where women who'd been told they were worthless could discover they were capable, where hard work mattered more than appearance or background. People started calling it the Bennett Boone Ranch, acknowledging both names equally. Marlowe heard herself described in town as that woman who stood up to Mercer and the one who runs that program for struggling women, and once, memorably, tougher than half the men in this valley. She still didn't quite believe it, still looked in mirrors and saw the fat girl everyone had rejected, still waited sometimes for the other shoe to drop, for disaster to strike, for proof that she didn't deserve this happiness. But those moments came less frequently now. And when they did, she had Silas to remind her who she'd become, had the girls to show her she mattered, had a ranch full of people whose lives were better because she'd refused to give up. One evening in late summer, Marlowe stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. The girls were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. Silas was in the barn with Daniel, checking on a mare about to foal. Ruth walked by with her sons, heading to town for supplies. Margaret was in the house, humming while she worked on the books. Jane and her husband, they'd married in June, were repairing fence on the eastern boundary. This land, these people, this life, all of it hard-won and harder kept, built from desperation and stubbornness and the refusal to accept that some people didn't deserve good things. Mrs. Chen's wagon appeared on the road, kicking up dust. She'd taken to visiting regularly, claiming she needed to make sure Marlowe was staying out of trouble. "Trouble seems to find me anyway," Marlowe had told her once. "That's because you're the kind of person who runs toward it instead of away. It's admirable and exhausting in equal measure." Now Mrs. Chen climbed down from her wagon with a basket that smelled like fresh bread. "Thought you might be hungry," she said, handing it over. "You spoil us." "Someone has to. You're all too busy working yourselves to death to eat properly." Mrs. Chen looked around the ranch with satisfaction. "It's grown since I was here last. New barn going up next month, and we're adding onto the house 2 more bedrooms for the program participants. You'll run out of land eventually. Then we'll figure something else out. We always do." Mrs. Chen smiled. "You know what I like about you, Marlowe? You don't know how to quit. Even when you probably should, you just keep pushing forward." Is that a compliment or a criticism? Both. The best qualities usually are. She climbed back into her wagon. "Keep fighting, girl. The world needs more people who refuse to stay down." After she left, Marlowe sat on the porch steps with the bread basket, tearing off pieces and eating them while watching her family. Her family. That still felt strange to think. Silas emerged from the barn and spotted her, changing direction to join her on the steps. "Mare's doing fine. Should have a foal by morning." "Good." He took a piece of bread, chewing thoughtfully. "You okay? You've got that look." "What look?" "The one where you're thinking too hard about something." Marlowe leaned against his shoulder. "Just thinking about how..."